Ich hatte kurz Sorge, dass
I was afraid for a little while that Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, yesterday when he talked about, when he held a speech here, would say a lot of the things about climate that I'm going to say now, and that didn't happen. Maybe, I thought he would talk about the challenges of the climate catastrophe, or maybe about our defense policies, but it's nice that he didn't, and so now we still have something to talk about, right?
ich war schon einmal hier 2000.
I was here once before, 2019, at TinCon, and back then we just started going into the streets with Fridays for Future. And back then I thought this would, we would do these school strikes for maybe a few months. And because I really couldn't imagine that our governments would willfully put fuel into the fire of these ongoing crises, even though there are solutions available. And so I'm part of the generation Merkel. There were the three promises during my childhood. The world keeps getting better. There won't be any war in Europe. And Merkel, will sort of keep everything in balance. Merkel, and that hasn't aged so well. And so we took the streets to remind the federal government of the climate crisis. And we don't need to go into the detail of that. And, now we might be a little ashamed that we were so naive, but really it was the government that was very quick in showing us that, they didn't forget about the climate crisis, but they didn't think it was that important. And so our goal is, to increase the pressure from the public. We went back home and we came back with more than 1 million people. And then the government, in response, offered a CO2 price of €10. And Volker Quaschning, a professor for energy supplies, he tweeted and had this nice summation. And so we sued the government, right? And we won. Yeah.
Und wir haben parallel alles daran
And in parallel, we tried our best to get that party voted out of office. And we also did a study that showed how the German federal government could still comply with the 1.5 degree limit, which would be possible if you wanted to. And so you might think things aren't that bad now in 2022. And we have been granted the right to talk about climate protection. We have the most climate-friendly government we've ever seen. And we have an unparalleled public that's behind climate action. And so, I talked to chimney sweepers recently, and they were like, we're going to fund chimney sweepers for future, because someone has to advance that. Electric heating, renovations, photovoltaic, solar power, and no company, no bank, no kindergarten can, pass up on climate change. And then in February, Russia started its invasion of Ukraine, and that showed us what does it mean to be dependent on fossil fuels. What's the risk, the danger of being dependent on autocratic governments? And within a few days, the public learned that you don't need to be a quote-unquote eco person to be into renewable energies. It's enough to think of Putin as not that great and to think of peace as kind of nice. And so this war really is fueled by fossil fuels, by coal, oil, and gas. And inherently, these energy sources are undemocratic. For fossil fuels, you need expensive, vast infrastructure. You can't just get it out of your own garden. And this infrastructure belongs to someone, to autocratic regimes, to big companies, and it always benefits these autocratic governments. And it always leads to dependencies, which are very undemocratic. And renewable energies are in contrast to that. They're independent, they can be created locally, and the sun and the wind cannot be privatized, and that's important and that's good. And so fossil fuels don't just lead to these large amounts of power and inequalities, but they also create a lot of climate gases. And because of them, we live through these unparalleled climate crises, which keeps on escalating. We might not want to think about it, but even though Ukraine is being attacked, the climate crisis continues. And so the war in Ukraine really showed us the usage of fossil fuels isn't just an attack on the basic necessities of our lives, but it's also unjust. And I just have to say something because, we were being attacked as undemocratic recently. Those who degrade, dry out, or contaminate our soils and the ecosystems of this world, those who allow the ecological basis of our existence to wear away, are in essence also doing this to the foundation of democracy.
And I wish that this is something that some people really should think about. It seems all logical. The arguments are very clear. And in this strange year 2022, we are reaching a point where I'm sitting at the Maybrit Illner talk show. There were 4 conservative men around me, and they have no argument with me, really. So that is the situation we're in, and that should all make us get us to think, because there were quite different moments, and the timer doesn't quite work for this. Here we are. So the person behind me, I was talking to the head of one of the largest trade unions about the energy revolution, climate change, and he said, I think everything will be good now. And I do want to believe that, but in fact, reality is moving in a very different direction. And I've noted down what happened since that memorable 24th of February. Since the 24th of February, sure, we have to get out of coal and gas, and especially out of the Russian variant of that. So that means adjust things, be flexible, of course. But these days, we're beginning to buy new gas to an extent that what we have been receiving, that has far been surpassed by new purchases. So up to 12 new LNG terminals, at least 3 of them permanent. That is not a transition or a provisional measure. That is a commitment for decades. And the analyses are so clear. We don't need one of these permanent new terminals. The infrastructure is hydrogen ready. The myth of gas infrastructure, that being half green, that is just a different kind of infrastructure. It's physics. Gas isn't any better than other fossil fuels. The footprint is quite similar to that of coal, and particularly through the methane emissions. So 12 new LNG terminals at the German coast, that at least would just eat the CO2 savings of Germany. And even if the 7 most likely ones are being built, you can imagine what's going to happen. We're not taking provisional measures. We're not filling in gaps. It's just like you're having to move from Munich to Hamburg, and the idea to take on credit and buy a house in Frankfurt on the way. That's not a step in the right direction.
Und auch jenseits der Küste.
And on the other side of the coast, the fossil machinery was unchecked. More than 800 kilometers of motorways are still being planned, and they're pulling through with that. And Transport Minister Wissing decided to continue building the A100 motorway in Berlin. Well, that's courageous, right, for a minister that has no idea how he can fulfill the climate goals in his own sector. More motorways means, by the wayside, more cars. They are using oil still, and of course, oil drilling in the nature reserve of the Wadden Sea in Borkum has been allowed. Okay, not everything is possible. So we don't want to have car-free Sundays. We can take on 100 billion new debt, but not for the climate, only for the German army. And we're giving another 3 billion on top as a fuel rebate to the oil industry. Thanks for nothing. No climate measure can compensate what is happening here right now. No solar field can make up to what the new projects are doing in case of doubt. No wind offensive, assuming that one can still find a place where the wind turbines can still go. We've had new rules on distance to residential areas. And the money that was supposed to create peace and security through sovereign energy systems is seeping away into a fossil fuel machine. And that is dramatic because the money, of course, is only there once. And now, when time is racing, it has to be invested into the future. It should be. And you could do it differently. 2022 was going to be the year in the crisis. In a crisis, we would simply do what is good and sustainable. The plans are there. We know the saving potentials. The costs for industry are clear. Plans for renewables. But while we are building LNG terminals at light speed, we could do the same with renewable energies. Just watch and be astonished. The fossil backlash is happening. And it makes you think. And it's not just happening in Germany, but across the world. And you could add worldwide, we are involved too. In Colombia, coal imports caused a coal mine to be extended. And the communities had actually been successful in the courts. But a call by the German Chancellor broke that. And new gas fields are being promoted, again breaking promises from the last UN climate change conference. And yes, the €9 ticket that gives everyone free travel on all German local transport is great, but it covers up the fact that after the flood catastrophes in the R Valley, our chances are being shredded. And that is what remains of the great days of the freedom energies. The year 2022. I just realized how bad my mood is turning by saying this. The year 2022 could become the year in which we allowed that one of the biggest and most important opportunities for change towards climate justice has become an open door for climate destruction. I can already see that the first people are writing, Luisa Neubauer is just bashing the government. No, that's not what it's about. I'm saying this because we have to open our eyes, because people have to be aware. I'm saying this because the climate question is not a matter of party politics and not even of politics as a whole. The climate crisis poses the very fundamental question how we intend to deal with the planet in coexistence or in war. And I'm saying this because no one should be denied the opportunity to understand that it could go very, very wrong unless we intervene. Sometimes Sometimes I'm being asked whether current events in climate politics are throwing us back. But that's how it works. We're not being thrown back. We're just getting deeper and deeper into the climate crisis, into what scientifically you call tipping points. The situation in this world that is currently 1.2 degrees warmer, that's so dramatic that we no longer have the words to describe what is happening. How do you describe something that has never been around before, which is far beyond anything that we could ever imagine? Code red for humanity is what the UN calls it. We haven't had that. But what do we do? What do these words do? Well, maybe it's like this. Currently, we are losing what we stand on. It's not the big crash that is painful, but the one catastrophe after another piling up. The systems and species, they cannot cry out in pain, but they would. And the people that depend on them, they are fighting and fighting, and they are starving and starving. And during that, we are fantasizing about new fossil projects, completely aware of the consequences. 6 years ago, when I was 19 years old, my father died. And I was spending a lot of time thinking about loss and grief since then. And I realized what the parallels are, because what we are experiencing is loss at a global scale that we haven't been prepared for, that we cannot bear. Those that are privileged maybe can buy themselves a few years or decades, but the others cannot. I am worried. I am hugely worried about the world, the opportunities that we are losing, and in the year 2022. But, and that is the good thing, there is a but. It doesn't have to be this way. We can fix this. We can turn it around. But for that, we have to make a few things clear, and that is 7 things. First, the necessary transition. The transition from energy and it doesn't come because it's logical or right or clever or rational or just or even doable. That's not the decisive argument. It won't also come because certain people like our economy minister wants it. It's about what I could describe as the plausibility paradox. It's so eminently plausible that we have to get out of fossil now and into renewables. We know that the solution is there. We've all been told about this by Maya Göpel and others, but because it's so logical, because it's so probable, because it's so plausible, it's not happening. Because we might overlook that the opposite is happening. We know it better. The plausibility paradox means that we know what the best option is, but it's not being taken. And we don't really want to hear that either, because we could have known better. Second,
we can do it. Die Klimakatastrophe
the climate catastrophe is not a question of better arguments. It's a question of power. So who has the power to destroy and who has the power to stop the destruction? It's not a coincidence. We've seen this again and again, that at the end of large crises, it's the fossil fuel industry that wins. That is a system, and it means fossility. And it hasn't been challenged, at least not sufficiently successfully. So we rarely have the experience in such a beautiful way how powerful the lobbies are and how afraid the politics are. Whoever thought that turning point meant climate protection? Sad story, it's not. We all know better by now. Turning point was what Chancellor Scholz said after the Ukraine war broke out. So after 3.5 years of activism, I can say that the real battle is still to come, and it will be a tough one, and you are needed. Third,
Drittens, beerdigen wir den
let's bury the myth that there are no alternatives, because we can do differently. The climate crisis is not coincidence, it's a political decision, and you can change political decisions at a time when theoretically majorities in society and in governments are there. People that like climate protection think it's a good thing, then we can change the framework in which political decisions are made. We must change the decision, the criteria, and many of the large fossil projects are just schemes. The fossil backlash is a collection of decisions, and if you think that decisions can be portrayed as natural laws, then please explain to me what you do with the menu in the restaurant.
Wir müssen über Lösungen sprechen. Aber die Lösung.
Fourth, we need to talk about solutions, but solutions alone have no power. They need to be made powerful, and that's up to us. Up to us to build lobbies for the best ideas and to go out and create facts, to build alliances so we can take on fossil fuels. It's up to us to block what destroys and build up what protects, to build public pressure from the media, from political parties, towards the direction that ensures security and creates real peace. Because we've known that this is possible. We know these stories that don't have to be fiction. Riding a bicycle in a city without being endangered, child-friendly cities, solar energy in every village, on every roof, homemade and cheap energy, the end of car dependency, the end of the 40-hour work week, more time for the world, for body and children, more value creation for well-being and prosperity worldwide, culture, education, sport, health. And many ask, yeah, what about the industry? Is that involved as well? Of course, the industry is needed, but not just in any way they want to, but rebuild the social and economic model that only works as long as we're in debt to the global south, to the future, to the foundations of our life. It no longer works. The so-called normality that only works with an exploitation, knowing exploitation of people and nature, there's no legitimacy for that anymore. And that's good.
Fünftens, wir haben keine Zeit.
Fifth, we no longer have time to play people off against each other. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, recently asked what one should say to a coal miner, when we quit coal. Yeah, Mr. Scholz, I'll tell you what you could tell them. No one, no single person should be forced to do work that allows you to pay the rent at the end of the month, but that work simultaneously destroys the future of your own children. And it's as simple as that. No human being, no parent should have to find themselves in that position. It's a question of respect. Greetings. To recognize that people have an interest in a secure income, in a secure planet, in a safe planet. And it's a question of respect to not play that off against each other for political profit. And now, Mr. Merz, leader of the CDU party, well, so you can't just go along with the yuppies in the cities, right? Well, you need a car in the countryside. And yes, Mr. Merz, of course you can play people off against each other, but you could also recognize that people have a right to mobility no matter where they live, and they have a right to be as independent as possible. Independent from rising fuel costs, independent from having to own a car. Parents have a right to know that people are not going to be run over, their children are not going to be run over on their way to school. It's very clear, it's very plain to see. You don't have to play people off against each other. You can acknowledge that they have rights, that everyone has rights, and that's obvious.
Und an der Stelle
And here, climate protection must be affordable is the biggest bullshit sentence in German climate policy.
die Ersten, die unter fehlendem Klimaschutz leiden,
The first who suffer from a lack of climate protection are the most vulnerable people among us, and those who not dare to design climate protection in such a way that it is fair and that makes the richest people bear the greatest responsibility. I'm telling you, please stop using the existence of poor people as an explanation for your own political cowardice.
Sechstens, verwechseln.
Number 6, don't confuse the people with the systems. These days, I hear that a lot. There's this sentiment going around, I lost my faith in humanity, in people. But I really think people are losing their faith in fossil systems because fossil systems don't work. And they can see through that marketing machinery that create this false reality because these systems are broken. It's good that they're losing their faith in that. And who really thinks that people are just, like on this path and they can't change, they're just gonna keep going. I just wanna remind you of the millions of people that in this year alone, in the last 3.5 years, went into the institutions, on the streets, to create dialogue. And I haven't been everywhere, but I, read the news, and it was hard to overlook, right? Their beliefs, people carry them in front of them every day. And it's it makes it visible. And number 7, I've only very conditionally chosen to be the person that says this, but oh well. You know the good arguments, we all know the good arguments for climate protection and a quick phase out of fossil fuels and so on. And that's great, but it's not that important. What's important is what we make of these arguments. At this time, in this crisis, there's no neutral position. This year, 2022, in an ongoing climate crisis, we have to choose, are we part of the problem or part of the solution? And that's a personal decision. You have to make that for yourself. And to be part of the solution, you have to decide actively, and then you have to change something. And you have to go out and ask yourself, what role can you play? What can you do in the streets and the institutions as a multiplier, as a listener, as a creative, as an organizer, as a person with an attitude? And I really think attitude, it contains the meaning of doing something, right? The promises of my childhood were all broken, but they were illusions as well. So today, let's decide to make real promises. No fairy tales, no nice sounding stories, but true forward-looking, world-affirming ones. So how about that? In this year, 2022, anything is possible. The most beautiful and the worst. And we know it could go either way. And we know one thing for certain, nothing happens just because it's right or important or good or favorable or plausible. It doesn't happen because there's theoretical majorities for it. It only happens when the social and political and economic power builds up where climate-friendly change can happen. And that's absolutely realistic. And it's good to know that things can go in the right direction. But it's all about what we do with that. Let's not fuck this up. Open your eyes. The crisis is here. It doesn't have to stay that way. We can save the earth, and I can promise you it's going to be worth it. It's going to be so fucking worth it.
Luisa Neubauer. So.
Right. That is a well-justified applause. So we have 5 minutes for a small Q&A. Do we really have 5 minutes? I've lost sense of time. Okay. Yeah, you were completely right to lose sense of time. But are there any questions from the audience? Would someone like to use the opportunity to ask a question to Luisa Neubauer? I think everyone in my position now have this Tony Kroos. Yeah, 50 minutes to think of a question. That's the quote from Tony Kroos, the German footballer. Okay, there's a question in the back there. Okay, that's good in a way, because it tells us that your message has arrived. It could be both. Maybe someone hasn't understood anything or everything. Well, we'll just leave that open in the room like that. There's, I think, someone. Okay, there's a question there. Could someone get a microphone back there? We don't have any microphone people. Can you do this? The person in the white T-shirt, could you carry the microphone to them? Okay, this is going to be interesting. But you don't have a microphone to carry. Well, use this one. These were the first 2 minutes already spent. We'll just overdraw. Thank you for this great talk, very inspiring. You mainly appeal to politics, But at the end, you also addressed business and include them in the equation. What's your appeal to companies? How do you want to move them to become more sustainable and green? Well, actually, I was addressing all of you, really, the people, but I would just to briefly tell you what this was about, but we've had the election, the government is there, and we've kind of divided the climate crisis into ministries. Now, it can't just be down to certain majorities. There have to be structures where things are decided, and it's upon us to change these structures and increase pressure and so on. But that has to come from the economy too, from businesses. And you can't sit and say, what about the economy? That doesn't really exist because we see this enormous diversification. We have so many companies, and we talk to many of them, Entrepreneurs for Future, for example. They clearly say a company practice that destroys the foundations of life is no company strategy. And it's quite good to see this common ground. And I think that is the question you have to ask these days, because you can be part of the problem or part of the solution. You cannot imagine that a company could just be accountable to itself, and that is a good thing, because there are so many players that we can rely on. We need the pressure from companies, from politics. If industry says we want to transform, but we need a politics that helps us with that, we do want to take our employees along the way, but you have to be loud, you have to show an attitude. And the other thing is, if you give a fuck about the planet, then be honest, because we have such a problem with greenwashing, and we are always busy. That is the biggest bullshit. If you don't care, fair enough, but don't paint it over and try to feel good about it. Be honest.
So, dann gucken wir mal, wo die nächste Frage.
Okay, then let's look for the next question. Luisa, I will then ask a question too, because I'd be interested. You talked about attitude, and attitude means action. And we could say that many have a kind of luxury problem. They know that this is an issue, but you feel, well, there is a wind of change, maybe. So maybe there isn't, so I don't feel the change. Could it be a problem of attitude, what I call the Western privileged attitude? We will be able to save ourselves in the end? Well, this idea, I mentioned it shortly, that the idea that many will think we will not be hit by the climate crisis. That is something I experience when talking to international friends. I don't experience that. And it's not even true. Most people have grandparents. What will they do on a hot day like this? And in whether that gets hotter and worse, they are not doing well. And that is just on our doorstep. We have forest fires in Brandenburg and the collateral damages that come with that. Every person that collapses in the heat goes to hospital, where Ricardo works. Greetings to Ricardo. My mother is a nurse. So the work is moved on to other fields, and it's a struggle to everyone. It's not just a charity project for us. And I believe that, yes, it is a matter of privilege that you might imagine you're protected, but it's very tragical too. If you believe or imagine or convince yourself that we don't matter and the world shouldn't matter to us, that's simply not true. It won't work out. It starts with wearing shoes that are normally not produced in Germany. We are always in this global connection. And just to finish this with a kind of comforting thought, this climate justice project, that is a glimpse of this gigantic global teamwork that we need. We have to assume the best of everyone. We have to assume for someone on the world, we are the reason today to change something. Maybe not directly, maybe not visibly, but in the heart. And that's how we get together. And the most obvious thing, I believe, is whether you go to a climate strike or a protest, you will notice, oh, all the others are here too. They all find it important. Of course, we'll make a difference. To someone in the world, we alone, in our attitude, in our action, are a source of hope. And that is comforting and healing. And I do wish that we won't forget that.
Liebe Luisa,
Dear Luisa,
Gott sei Dank waren nicht so viele Fragen. Da müssen
thank
wir-
you. Thankfully, there were not so many questions. Well, it's just starting, really. But
Wir haben jetzt leider keine Zeit mehr.
sorry, we have run out of time for further questions. But I'm very grateful that you were here, and I'm grateful too. And that was a fantastic talk.
Vielen Dank, Luisa Neubauer.
Thank you so much, Luisa Neubauer. Thank you.